Hey there, Pyromaniacs. So Agents of Mayhem is finally out and I am hyped to get my hands on it since I really enjoy the Saints Row games. They're not as good as your average GTA game, but they're still great sandbox games in their own right. So in this video, I'd like to catalog my thoughts on each game in the Saints Row quadrilogy, leading up to the spin-off series Agents of Mayhem. Where to start? Then at the beginning. Saints Row 1 is interesting. The game starts with our nameless protagonist getting caught in the middle of a drive-by between members of the three leading gangs of Stillwater: the Vice Kings, the West Side Rollers, and the Carnales. But before he can be turned into Strawberry Jam, he's saved by Keith David! The Arbiter? Yeah, this little game that could have some real money behind it with some of the cast, as you'll see later on. So anyway, the protagonist is recruited by Keith Julius to join his gang, the 3rd Street Saints. The protagonist apparently agrees to a life of crime, and we're introduced to the rest of the characters the protagonist will interact with throughout the game. That being Lynn, Dex, Troy, and Johnny. That was weird. But of course, before you can join the Saints, you have to be canonized, which is how this game teaches you how to use the hand-to-hand combat you'll most likely never use because... oh boy, is this bad. From what I can tell, there's no way to target onto your opponent, so you're left to flail around and hope you hit them and block whenever they try to hit you. There are actually 2 ways to end this mission. Either you get pummeled due to the terrible controls, or you take advantage of the interesting way to replenish health in this game. Food. Yeah, very unique, I know. But it's really the execution that I find so interesting. Basically, you replenish health by opening up your weapon wheel and selecting the food you want with the D-pad. Very similar to how Estus flasks are used in Dark Souls. Yes, I just compared Saints Row to Dark Souls. And if games journalists can compare Crash Bandicoot to Dark Souls, then anything's fair game. Anyway, after the protagonist gets thoroughly beaten to a pulp, the game introduces you to all the other gameplay mechanics. Those being shooting and driving. First of all, the gunplay is passable. It's pretty basic point-and-shoot stuff. It would probably be easier if I were controlling it with a keyboard and mouse rather than an Xbox controller. It's pretty bare bones, but I have to respect Volition that they didn't just take the targeting-based gunplay the GTA games were using at the time. So finally onto the controls of the thing you'll be doing most in this game. Driving. And I've decided to recreate my first experience with these controls. Enjoy. Alright, finally get to drive in this driving game. Alright, let's see how this plays. Okay. No. You piece of crap. You press A to accelerate. The game has Mario Kart controls in 2006. After all the GTA games, even the 2D ones used the traditional trigger controls. Saints Row 1 used the buttons to control the car. Not only that, but the cars all feel awkward and stiff to control. None of them feel natural to drive, and most of the missions in the game take place in a car, so this is a really big strike against the game. I could go on and on about how incompetent this design is for the rest of the video, but instead I'll just go on to the best part about this game. The story, or stories to be more specific. Yeah, the way that this game does missions is actually really interesting. There are 3 stories, each one for a different gang you have to take one, and each one is spearheaded by a different saint. The Rollers by Lynn, the Carnales by Dex and Troy, and the Vice Kings by Johnny. Personally, the Vice Kings missions are my favorite, since they elaborate on the backstories of Julius and... Not to mention it has the most well-known celebrity appearances with Mila Kunis as Tanya Winters and Michael fricking Clark fricking Duncan as Benjamin King. Benjamin King is actually my favorite of the gang leaders due to just how powerful and imposing he seems, while also being a calm, calculating businessman. And he actually joins you in the end and becomes one of the Saints. I guess Volition just didn't want to kill off John Coffey, so they killed Meg Griffin instead, and honestly, I don't blame them. All in all, Saints Row 1 was a janky, poorly designed, well-written game with great characters and a cool story. Typically a game that wouldn't have got a sequel and just be doomed to become a hidden gem of the 7th generation, soon to be overshadowed by GTA 4. Surprisingly, it didn't end there, because they made a sequel, Saints Row 2. or as I like to call it, the real GTA 4. Yes, Saints Row's saving grace was the fact that Rockstar decided to abandon the lighter tone of earlier games like 2 and Vice City, and instead went for a darker, more serious route with GTA 4, which turned off some people. Meanwhile, Volition saw this and decided to advertise Saints Row 2 as the antithesis of everything Saints Row 4 is. They made sure to make Saints Row 2 look completely off the walls insane, as if they took GTA 2 and made it 3D. Now, the question is, does the game actually feel like GTA 2 in 3D? Well, no. It's more like the world of Saints Row 1 mixed with the tone of San Andreas and the characters of Vice City, set in or around 2008. This game improved drastically on everything the first game did, and is not only my favorite in the series, but also one of my favorite GTA-style sandbox games as well. I won't elaborate on everything, since most things are the same as Saints Row 1, but just generally better. You control the cars like you would in GTA, but they don't spin out at the slightest tap like they do in GTA 4. The gunplay is more akin to that of Halo, and is more fleshed out as a result. There are multiple different hand-to-hand fighting styles you can unlock throughout the game, and although it's still pretty basic, it still controls better than the original. One of the developers once said the story and tone of Saints Row 2 was inspired by Tarantino films like Kill Bill and Pulp Fiction, and it definitely shows. The story begins where Saints Row 1 leaves off. With the protagonist being blown up, Julia supposedly being in on it, revealed that Troy was an undercover cop the whole time, and the implication that Dex knew it. But by some divine intervention, the protagonist survives aside from going into a coma and is now in prison. That is until he or she... Yeah, you can play as a girl now. Either way, I'll still keep referring to the protagonist as a he just to reduce confusion. Anyway, he wakes up and meets a fellow inmate named Carlos who breaks them both out. From here, you begin to rebuild the Saints, bring in new lieutenants since the old one are either turncoats, successful entrepreneurs, or dead. But before that happens, you have to rescue Johnny from death row. So after that, you end up recruiting Carlos, the guy who broke you out of prison, Shaundi, a snarky stoner chick, who's probably my favorite in the group next to Johnny, and Pierce. He's Pierce. From here on out, the story branches out into 3 separate stories, just like the first one. The games this time being the Brotherhood, the Ronin, and the Sons of Samdi. I personally prefer all these stories over the ones in Saints Row 1, which is quite an accomplishment, but if I had to choose a favorite, it would have to be the Ronin. The Ronin missions, in essence, are a typical samurai story. The story follows Shogo Akuji, the son of a wealthy crime boss trying to do right by his father to gain his respect, but his hubris gets in his way at every turn, bringing his father to see him as a disgrace, until it finally leads him to a very Tarantino-esque demise. At its core, Saints Row 2 is a revenge story. A story of a man who is stripped of everything and wants nothing more than to take it back from the people who took it. It's a fun, gripping, nail-biting, and not overly silly story that I'd recommend to anyone who hates GTA 4, and was definitely a great setup for what was sure to be a climactic third and final installment. So what went wrong? Let's dive into Saints Row the Third to find out. Well, first off, the ability to replay past missions and cutscenes has been cut, so I actually had to start a new game to record any early game footage, so that's a great start. So on the good side, the gunplay once again has been improved now to feel more like Call of Duty, using the left trigger to aim instead of the thumbstick. The car controls are better than Saints Row 1, but substantially worse than Saints Row 2. It's kind of hard to explain in words what makes them feel worse. I guess it just feels like the cars are more bottom heavy so that they don't flip over. It almost feels like an arcade racing game, and the glowing arrows don't exactly help the matter. In fact, that's the best way to explain how Saints Row feels in general. It feels arcadey. It's like they stripped everything that made Saints Row unique to make it feel like a linear arcade game. They took out the different gang stories for a more linear mission structure. Most of the missions in the game are just side activities shoehorned in. I swear if I have to play Guardian Angel one more time, I'll go right up to the Volition office and go full Johnny on them. Which reminds me, let's talk about the story, shall we? The game opens up with a bank robber led by the boss, newcomer and method actor Josh Burke, Johnny, and I'm sorry, who's that?
Shaundi.
What?
We need to talk.
We really don't.
It's just, if I die here, I want things to go unsaid.
I should be so lucky.
That's Shaundi? That's not Shaundi. Shaundi is laid back. She's calm yet cynical. This chick's more like Lynn with rabies. This is the most drastic character change since the time they turned Samus Aran into a whiny coward. Anyway, back on track, the heist goes south, Burke bails, and they get put in jail, but are bailed out by a crime syndicate brilliantly named the Syndicate, led by a Belgian mob boss called Philippe Lorin and his assistants Viola and Kiki de Winter. Man, why does Viola's voice sound so familiar? Hang on, I gotta check this. I gotta figure out. This is gonna drive me nuts, I'm sorry. Never mind, I've never heard that voice. I've never heard that voice actress in my life, I swear. Moving on. So, Lorin proposes the Saints join the the Syndicate, but the boss declines, leading to a shootout on a plane, which leads to the death of Johnny. So, with the only likable character dead, and after a stupid amount of padding, they kill Lorin, and over an hour into the game, we're finally introduced to the three gangs and their three leaders. The Deckers, led by emo cyberpunk Adam Lambert wannabe Matt Miller. The Luchadors, led by Rey Mysterio wannabe Eddie Pryor, aka Killbane. And the Morningstar, led by Kiki and Viola. So from here on out, it just feels like the writers just started throwing crap at a wall to see what stuck. Then they took whatever didn't stick and glued it on. Zombies, high-tech super soldiers, it feels like they really were trying to make GTA 2 in 3D, but ended up making something even crazier and even less coherent. The game's sense of humor sucks too. While Saints Row 2 had a more satirical sense of humor, cynically caricaturing real life and adding in zany things in the background, Saints Row 3 feels like it was written by a middle schooler. The jokes range from lowbrow raunchy humor to lowbrow toilet humor. It's like if Amy Schumer wrote a heist film. Saints Row the Third is a mediocre game. Although it's mechanically better than Saints Row 1, the story, writing, world, and overall content pales in comparison to its predecessors. Not long after the release of Saints Row the Third, THQ went out of business and ended up selling off Volition along with the Saints Row license to the publisher Deep Silver. The publisher famous for classic titles like Escape Dead Island, Mighty No. 9, and of course, Homefront: The Revolution. Truly a prestigious company. So, we're finally here at the fourth and final numbered installment of the Saints Row franchise. So without further ado, let's take a look at Saints Row 4. So Saints Row 4 starts out with the boss, Matt Miller, and a new character named Asha, stopping a terrorist attack and saving the world from a nuclear threat, which ends up getting the boss elected as President of the United States, along with his Vice President, Keith David, and his Chief of Staff, Benjamin King, now voiced by Terry Crews. Not long after his inauguration, though, the Earth is invaded by a Shakespeare-quoting alien warlord known as Zinyak, who traps the boss in a computer simulation of Steelport and destroys the world because I guess that's what alien warlords do. In this computer simulation, the boss is given superpowers so he can better traverse the city and fight the aliens in this computer simulation. So with his new superpowers, he must take down the simulation from the inside and rescue his friends so all together they can fight Zinyak and avenge the people of Earth. Now, I know what you're thinking. Pyro, you're not fooling anyone. There's no way that's a real game. Well, I appreciate the fact that you think I'm that creative, but sadly, I'm telling the truth. Seriously, was the entire team on Loa Dust? How do you go from street thugs to aliens? It's completely insane. And as much as I want to tear this game apart, I have to say, this game actually isn't that bad. First of all, it brought back the ability to play music outside of a car, which has been missing since the first game. Second, the characters are a lot better written, with some clever humor throughout. And third, the controls in this game are pretty solid. The driving controls are greatly improved over the third game, and the gunplay is very quick and responsive. The new superpowers have a surprising amount of depth to them. There are tons of different types of powers and different versions of each one to mix and match to your liking. This game decided to go balls to the wall with its madness, and it completely worked in its favor. The only glaring issue with this game, from what I can tell, is the fact that it's a Saints Row game and not a Crackdown game like it seems to wish it was. Saints Row is a game series that has been, even in its craziest incarnation, a game series about criminals. Suddenly, in the fourth installment, you're a superhero fighting aliens, and it's a massive leap from inane to insane. So that's the Saints Row series. 2 mediocre games, 1 fantastic game, and 1 game that would be fantastic if it belonged to a better franchise. Wow, that's some legacy Agents of Mayhem has to live up to. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I've actually wanted to do this video long before Agents of Mayhem was even announced, but I haven't had the time or resources to pull it off. Anyway, until next time, goodbye and stay nerdy, my friends.